Chakma. Hello, and welcome to Wild Wisdom podcast. My name is Chelsea Bess Marie, or LC for short.
And I am Madison Murphy Barney, but you can call me Ed. Together, we are the Cedar Siblings. We are two-spirit indigenous folks who are endlessly interested in how we can apply the wisdom, creativity, and resilience of the natural world into our everyday lives.
We noticed that we spend a lot of time standing in two worlds as indigenous people, as two-spirit people, and also as professionals. This constant switching can be challenging in the best of times, but even more so in this moment.
This podcast is one of our attempts to not only do less code switching, but to bring our worlds closer together and in a balanced way that invites listeners to learn from the natural world as we take on this group project of collective survival and liberation.
On each episode of this podcast, we focus on one species and their characteristics that can offer us guidance during the tumultuous times we live in. And boy, are they tumultuous. This week, we will be learning from the three sisters.
Before we begin our discussion of corn, beans, and squash, we want to remind you that you can support our work by joining our Patreon at Cedar Siblings and on Instagram. And we'd also love to hear from you via email at wildwisdompod@gmail.com.
All right, with that, we invite you to take a deep breath or take a moment to ground and cleanse, and away we go.
Okay, so the three sisters, there's actually a fourth sister, which is sunflowers, but today we're going to talk about the three sisters because they are like the most known and beloved. They're a traditional indigenous agricultural method that was primarily developed in the Iroquois and Haudenosaunee nations, and it's a companion planting system that combines corn, climbing beans, and squash, and they're all planted together in the same mound. So how it works is the corn grows tall and provides a natural pull for the beans to climb up, and if you've ever grown beans, you know that they love to like swirl and twirl around something that's growing. And then so the beans climb up the corn stalks and add nitrogen to the soil through nitrogen fixing bacteria that's in their root nodules. And this nitrogen benefits all the plants and just soil in general. Nitrogen is beneficial for. And then finally, the squash spreads along the ground and creates a living mulch that suppresses weeds, retains moisture, and deters some pests because of the really prickly stems of squash. And so there's a number of benefits to growing the three sisters together. They grow vertically, so there's more space for more food to be grown in small areas. As I mentioned, the beans' nitrogen really reduces the need for fertilizer, and it's just the soil loves it, the beans love it, everyone loves it. And it also, this system of them growing together makes them more drought resistant because of the squash leaves shading the soil and reducing what's evaporating. And then on a consumption level, when we eat these three things together, they complement each other well. The corn provides a carbohydrate but doesn't have amino acids. And then the beans provide protein, including the missing amino acids from corn. And finally, squash provides vitamins A and C and minerals and healthy oils from the seeds. So, from what we know, the three sisters have been grown together since at least 3,000 years, since the past at least 3,000 years. And archaeological evidence shows that this companion planting system was established long, long before colonizers came. And different indigenous nations adapted the technique to their local climates and conditions, all the way to our relatives in the Southwest. So, the ways you can plant these are you create mounds, small hills that are like 4 inches high, and then like 12 to 20 inches wide and spaced about 3 feet apart. And then, as I mentioned, the corn goes first. And then once it gets to about like 6 inches tall, the beans and the squash are planted around it. And varieties vary based on who's growing them, what they want to eat, what they consider delicious and want to plant. And for many of our people, there's also a personification of the three sisters as the three inseparable sisters. Corn is seen as the eldest sister who stands tall and supports her siblings. Beans represent the giving middle sibling who nourishes the soil and family, and the squash are the protective youngest ones who shield their siblings from threats. And there are many ceremonies amongst different tribes that mark the planting and harvesting of the three sisters, and different tribes have different practices. I don't know my tribe's three sisters practices, if there is one. Chelsea, do you know yours?
Yeah, we generally also participate in the green corn ceremony. We're part of the Southeastern tribes, and a lot of Southeastern tribes participate in green corn. And so I think probably just because of location and relative proximity, we also kind of picked that practice up or were invited to participate in that with other tribes in that area.
And one thing to note is that, there's sort of this renewed interest in Three Sisters, which might seem sudden to some people, but it's sort of I roll my eyes a little bit at it because it's like one of those things that like, oh, Indigenous people have been doing for this forever, and then it becomes hot all of a sudden, and people like really think they've like invented something new. But more and more the benefits of it scientifically are being shown, and like that can be helpful for so many reasons. So like I get it and it's important, and like regardless of how they come across it, I'm glad people come across sustainable farming techniques. But a lot of organic farmers use variations of the system in order to reduce chemical inputs, and it incorporates it as water conservation. And many food sovereignty movement of our people and other peoples are revitalizing the traditions and practices. And a lot of school and community gardens use it as an educational tool about ecology and indigenous knowledge. And so in this way, it has its importance there. Yeah, as we're recording this in April where Chelsea is, it's about time to put seeds in the ground where I am. Snowing as we speak as I look out the window. Yeah, on good old April 8th. Yeah, we're getting snow. And it's like very cute and funny. Like the birds are all out and about, like having a spring day, a little confused about what's going on, but it's snowing. So we usually put our plants in the ground a little bit later, and for that reason, like my seeds are started in little cases beside me, because if I started from seed for most things, there would be no fruit by September. Yeah, and so when we think about these plants and often referred to as the sustainers of life, that really symbolize interdependence in all things nature. There's much to learn from in this moment that we find ourselves in, when it comes to embodying a relationship of reciprocity and cooperation and sustenance. And I know we've talked about this before, I think especially when we were talking about like our beaver relatives, but it's like one of those things where it's like humans think we can out design the planet in some way or like outsmart systems and like make something better than what like billions and millions of years of coevolution has created, and we can't. We can't do that. And so it's like in all the ways we can actually learn from the genius of our planet instead of like trying to, I don't know, outwit it in some way, which we will never be able to do. We have failed miserably at every attempt that we've made.
I think that we have also talked about how nature really mimics movement building as well. And I feel like this is another perfect example of our needs, our stories, our gifts might be super different from situation to situation, but we really can actually thrive more completely and holistically and get the needs met that we can't meet ourselves when we are working across, I'll say across species, but I think across identities of all kinds, across geographies of all kinds. And this has always been a really great kind of embodiment of movement building and how we can best do movement building successfully in being able to co-thrive with each other.
Yeah, for sure. And like something else it reminds me of is like the stay in your lane mindset of, the corn is not trying to do all of the things that the bean can do. The corn is not trying to nitrogen fix and all that. The corn knows that as it grows, it provides like vital nutrients, root systems, and a place for the beans to grow so the nitrogen fixing can happen. And I think a lot about this, how ineffective we become when we try to do everything and be everything, especially in movement building. And instead, if we're just like, cool, I'm corn, I know what corn got to do, which I would never be corn because I'm the shortest person in every single group. So I'm not corn. Let's say I'm squash. It's like, all right, cool, that's my job. I'm going to do that rather than trying to like meddle in what the corn's up to and take its energy away and like thus it can't grow. And then like none of the system works if I'm trying to be a plant that I'm not and don't just focus on creating those big old leaves to stop the evaporation and keep out the raccoons.
And it reminds me of the kind of imagery that folks have recently been introducing in a lot of the calls to movement building that have been necessary forever, but definitely have been pulled to the forefront by folks who maybe hadn't historically been participating or been aware of kind of grassroots organizing and movement building of the different archetypes and
Mm.
ways that you can participate in movement building and in grassroots movements and community building, really. And just like you're saying, I think these sisters give us a roadmap for like live into your gifts because it's not important that you have everything. It's
Right.
important that you live into and grow and stand tall in the gifts that you do have because those are going to be a complement to someone else who does not have the same gifts but can benefit or needs what your gifts bring to the table and vice versa.
Yeah, and I think even beyond gifts, like part of it that also stands out to me is knowledge. And so often our movements are like cannibalizing themselves by pushing people out for not knowing everything or like saying things exactly as they would have said them and things like that. And it like truly destroys our movements. And so I think we can see like our gifts of like, okay, yeah, say I'm squash, but like also say I only know how to do what squash does and I don't have to know everything about the movement or like there is no way to grow one way or do one thing and like it really takes all kinds. But I'm so sick of like watching really good movements and like groups of folks disintegrate because of this sort of strange desire to like outsmart, even though it's not smart. It's like truly the dumbest thing we can do is like have people who want to like be a part of movement and world building and instead just be like, no, sorry, you said four wrong words. You actually can't sit with us. Like, what are we doing? And so just remember that like even in the Three Sisters, there's many different types of beans you can grow. There's many different, like one vine of squash will grow like very differently shaped and sized squash. And so just letting that be true as well is really important because I mean, it's the most, it keeps me out like coming into a space and what like future casting of like what's inevitably going to happen based on the dynamics there like keeps me out of the work and I if some work and I imagine other people too of just being able to be like wow we've been in this cycle before if it's the same group of people we'll be in the cycle again and we're losing really valuable crucial time that we can't get back meanwhile like folks on the other side of the aisle are have like really well oiled communications machines and are just like come one come all to our really shitty party. I don't even mean that as political party. I mean it as like gathering party vibes.
I also just I feel like we're dancing around the concepts of cancel culture
Mhm.
versus kind of like loving accountability and, being able to be in generative movement versus militant movement. And it's really hard to step outside of white supremacy culture characteristics a lot of the times in that it tells us to get rid of people or that people are discardable or that there aren't ways that we can, like, there's one right way, right? So all these plants should have, perfection, right? Is what it tells us. And it also tells us that if any of them don't meet those standards, then they're disposable and should be cut off, should be pushed out, should be whatever. And I feel like at the same time that we are pushing against those forces, we often replicate those same things within our movements over and over and over again. And like, it's so challenging for me to understand how people can't see the replication.
Mhm.
Like white supremacy culture characteristics are so pervasive that people can't even like see beyond their inaction of them. And so I think, again, great lessons from our natural environment of these three crops just literally staying in their lane, as you said, and also continuing to work with each other, even when varieties change, when weather patterns change, when soil changes, when all of these things continue to change around them, different challenges come about. They continue to live into those strengths and continue to lean on each other, even if maybe corn was not standing up so straight this year. Corn was having some problems.
Or
Corn did
needed twine to
not,
hold her up.
show all the way up to the table as we would have liked. Beans still support, still wrap around. The squash still supports and shelters, and vice versa, right? And so, yeah, I'm just wondering how do we live into that lesson more? Like, how do we apply this to, it's really frustrating when someone comes to the table and microaggresses you 50,000 times, right? And we also know learning takes time and it can be really easy if we're not doing our own work and or if, it's happened for the 50 billionth time to act reactively. And so how do we use these lessons to apply them to and learn how to change our behavior to mimic these more?
Yeah, the $8 trillion question. And I think part of it is like when you said stay in your lane, it reminded me of like I pictured my garden last year where like these three plants very much doing their job were so chaotic. Like they were crawling all over the garden and the fence and things like that. So I think that like it's another example that like staying in your lane is doing your job and seeing how much you can grow and understanding that when you do that, you're going to like find like in a beautifully surprising way that you like intersect with other plants and like meet other folks in the garden and like suddenly you're in the cauliflower bed like cool, what are they up to? But it's like just one of those things where it's like staying in your lane and knowing your job allows you to get so much further and like have a mindset of curiosity of like where might I crawl to, as opposed to just like I there's an order, there's a right way, there's like all these things of white supremacy culture that we put on our own movements. Like it's even the physical way that these plants grow shows that's so unnecessary and like holds us back. And if like I tried to keep them in growing in rows, like there'd be so much less fruit, there'd be so many fewer squash, there'd be so much less abundance to share. Um, yeah. And like I think it's also like another way of thinking of it is that there's no right way and like we can just, there's no right way to grow. There's just like growing stronger and together and making moves, but it takes so many ways to get there and like we need so many different people and like experts in different things to do it. And so to like distill our movements down to like a few ever changing, really ambiguous rules is just such a shame.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to throw a curveball in here and hopefully the three sisters can help us solve this problem. You and I both know some folks that come into some spaces, right? They're external, non-in-group community member people and right, we're the squash growing on into the cauliflower bed here and or maybe it's the cauliflower growing on into maybe more accurate and apt. And so we already know these plants oftentimes will try to make growth adjustments for themselves, right? Just the nature of what we have. We try to grow towards the light, right? And in some ways, humans are hopefully in that same way, that same pattern. And sometimes the cauliflower overshadows the squash leaves and things don't thrive, right? And if that cauliflower doesn't have external kind of accountability redirecting, then that can cause a lot of problems for the rest of the ecosystem. And so what do the three sisters tell us about how we handle these types of situations? Because we see these people and these folks, these cauliflowers in lots of movements. We see them in lots of spaces doing lots of harm, and we often see them either unaddressed or we see them canceled outright. And I think that there has to be a really intentional response, right? There has to be some communal response, some gardener response to these cauliflowers to help make the whole community thrive. And so I'm just curious what we think we can pull from the teachings of these three sisters for this specific phenomenon, we'll call it.
Okay, I'm gonna get extremely meta here. And okay, so in what we're talking like the three sisters are planted, right? Like they're not naturally occurring like they're planted in this way, in this order. And thus there means there's a gardener. And the gardener is like guiding the movement of the garden. And so we know that there are some gardeners who like use a lot of like Roundup and, chemicals and things to like have strictly no weeds garden. And I don't think any of us are interested in that. Like some weeds keep life spicy, especially from like the mustard family. So, but what I'm thinking here, and it's like as you know, a lot of my work is around like storytelling and health. And people talk a lot about like conflicting priorities of people who want, data-driven decisions and this, that, and the other thing. And something I always bring the people and organizations I work with back to is that there is the thing you have to always keep on the table and always coming back to is the goal, the shared meaning and goal of why you all came to the table in the first place. Like, why are you all here? What do you all care about? And that has to always be like recentered and recentered and recentered. And so in this way, I want to say that like the gardener is sort of that like guiding hand that is like the thing that brings us to the movement, be it like a more equitable world or justice or like all these other things that bring people to the table. It'll depend movement and space by space, but bringing that forward and forward so that like when there is like overlap and like outshading or like overgrowth and things like that, that there's something that everyone has agreed upon that allows them to then like do the pruning and readjustment and like changing of course that needs to happen. And like of course there's always a chance that somebody comes to the movement and actually wants to be a part of the movement but hasn't signed or like isn't as interested in being a part of the like I guess like the mission is less center to them. But I think like that's why it's our responsibility in movement building to constantly be reminding people of that so that like if they're coming to the space to do this, they know like what we're down for and what we're not, and like what this group or this movement or this collective is devoted to.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I also wonder, again, we're each bringing different perspectives, we're bringing different strengths and gifts to the table. And that also means the way we're interpreting that reaffirmation of the central mission differently. And so I think that's also on my mind of how do we help folks find a common understanding of that mission and that central goal, that central tenet, and help keep folks accountable to striving towards it, not just like, we see virtue signaling a whole bunch as well, or kind of gaslighty, yes, I'm on board types of things. And so also, I think the three sisters, it's a relationship, right? It's an accountable relationship of support, but also, the corn's going to break if the beans get too heavy and like produce too much. And so it's also an accountability relationship between these three entities as well. And so I think there's a lot of learning that we can do there around how do we lovingly assert boundaries and guidelines and continually check in about, are we still headed in the same direction, and are we still bought into this common idea of thriving, whatever that means for whatever movement it is.
And I think like it's okay, and sometimes I think we don't give ourselves permission. Like it's okay if the answer is no. And it's okay if like things need to divide off and people need to do work in one direction and others in another. And like that's fine. Again, there's different varieties of these same plants that can grow in many different places and climates and things. And so like it's okay to become a new variant of bean and just don't, like I'd rather have that, I think, than to have it happen, in a good way and with respect of just like we're going in different directions. I'd rather have that than like a fully overgrown garden that can't then serve anybody because it's just like there's too much going on.
Yeah, 1,000%.
Yeah,
Well, seems like we have lots of lessons to learn from the three sisters.
we really do. They know some stuff. Um, any final words about these three baddies?
I love them in a salad. I
Mhm.
love them in a field. I love them just about anywhere. And so thank you for bringing them to us today.
Yeah, of course. And I think one other thing that's like small but worth saying as a sign off is like they're also food, and the way we best all come together is over food. And so like, how can our food that we sustain ourselves with like also just be like symbolic of the work we're trying to do in the world.
Snaps to that.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Eat well. Talk soon. Bye.